Hey everyone, David Chen here. Morbius, it's finally out in theaters, a movie so many of us have been waiting for, and I was really happy to have a 70-minute long conversation about this movie with Patrick H. Willems. If you don't know Patrick Willems, he's a very skilled video essayist and filmmaker. Check him out at youtube.com/Patrick H. Willems. I'll put a link to him in the description. But we talked about why this movie isn't so great, what's wrong with the action in the movie, what's wrong with the plotting of the movie, what exactly Jared Leto is doing in this film, and of course, dive into those wild post-credit scenes. So, hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy this video, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for future videos. All right, here's our conversation about Morbius. Patrick, thanks for joining me today.
David, it is a pleasure to be back here with you.
So, the reason I've gathered us here today is because there's been a momentous occasion at the box office, something that's been years in the making, and that is the release of Morbius. This movie was originally supposed to come out in July of 2020. It's been delayed, I think, around 6 times, and they finally got the release date right.
It was even going to come out in January, and then didn't they delay it like 2 weeks before it was supposed to open?
They had to give Spider-Man No Way Home some oxygen. You know,
I think wasn't there just like a big new surge of COVID of like Omicron or something that was gonna eat into their box office?
That too. Plus, again, they had to give No Way Home. You know, it's time to shine,
of course,
in the sun. So, but I saw that you watched it, Patrick. I watched it. We're going to be talking about it on the Filmcast as well, with my co-hosts there. And I wanted to just spend some time chatting about it with you. We are going to spoil the whole film. So if you don't want to know spoilers for Morbius, just there's other videos out there for you. Probably some ASAP Science or how-to videos. Just something that's not Morbius or movie-related, honestly, that you should watch instead. But we are going to spoil everything about Morbius. So let's get into it. Patrick, overall, what do you think of the movie?
I didn't think it was a very good movie.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, okay, so here's my thing with Morbius. So I'm a pretty big comic book fan, and I have been my whole life. I will say, I think I was first introduced to the character of Morbius, the living vampire, on the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, in which, because it was a children's cartoon, they couldn't actually have him sucking blood, and they added this weird thing where he actually sucks plasma from people through these suckers on the palms of his hand. Anyway, but Morbius has never been an especially popular character. He is kind of I would say, at best, C-list Spider-Man villain. The idea that a blockbuster Morbius film starring Oscar-winning actor Jared Leto was made, I think, is objectively hilarious. Mm-hmm. Like, the second this movie was announced, I was like, I will be there opening weekend, because this is a dumb idea, and I just think it's funny, and I want to see what that'll be. But also, I don't think this movie is opening like #1 at the box office. It's doing like pretty solidly.
Okay, it made $39 million opening weekend. Yeah.
Right. Which is interesting, considering that I don't think, and I'm sure someone will tell me I'm wrong, I don't think a single person out there was excited for this movie. I don't think a single person expected this movie to be good. And somehow just Sony knew how to market it in a way where everyone was just kind of felt this weird obligation to be like, well, I guess this is the thing we're supposed to see now. That it's like, you know, maybe it's tangentially connected to Marvel stuff, and so maybe I should see it because I like that stuff more. But like, no one went to this movie. Like, I can't imagine anyone being disappointed by this movie, because it was pretty much exactly what I think all of us expected it to be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Sony at this point is pretty unstoppable. I mean, they've gotten Venom 1 and 2 to be huge hits. Obviously, they were involved with Spider-Man No Way Home as well. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Like, they are real, and Uncharted. You know, a bunch of hits in a row. And say what you will about making terrible movies, they know how to market them. And
they do.
They know how to make it into an event that people want to get to. And I would argue, in this case, the case of Morbius, the marketing is like actively deceptive. You know, it is. There's tons of stuff that was in the trailers was like not in the final film. All this Spider-Man stuff, Michael Keaton stuff, like it all just makes you feel like, oh my gosh, if I saw Spider-Man No Way Home, I gotta watch Morbius because it's the next step in the MCU or whatever, quote unquote, in association with Marvel. If you saw that at the beginning of the movie,
yeah, I think they've been doing that since Venom. But the thing that I'm really fascinated by is the way the trailers said, like, introducing the next Marvel legend. Like, that was the wording they used, and which I think it's amazing because I had the same feeling like when Venom came out, just like imagining Kevin Feige's frustration, being like, these people at Sony are like fucking up my whole like plan here, and trying to like drag us down in the mud, like as if we're associated with their stuff, and like claiming it's like kind of canonical and is relevant in the MCU. And I just think that's funny because Sony just doesn't give a shit, and they're just I feel like they would probably surely admit this if you ask them. They are just throwing as much like Marvel branding and stuff on there just to try to ride the coat. They're riding the coattails so hard.
Yes.
And I'm like, in a weird way, I kind of respect this because they are in this position where they have the rights to Spider-Man and then all the supporting Spider-Man things.
Yes.
But Marvel actually produces the like movies that have the word Spider-Man in the title. So they're left with everything else. And and the thing is, if you look at the comics, the thing with Spider-Man is Spider-Man is not like X-Men or Avengers with this whole like collection of like various like really important characters with like offshoots and like like it's a whole universe of comic series. If you look at X-Men, you've got then like X-Force, Marauders, Generation X, New Mutants, all these things that could be their own things. With Spider-Man, you basically have Spider-Man. And then the characters who pop up every so often in Spider-Man stuff that don't tend to have like their own solo titles. But Sony is now left with all of these supporting characters that they are kind of like, I feel like they're almost like gaslighting the audience into thinking like, oh yes, these are popular, beloved characters that you've always liked. Because like Venom is like the one exception where Venom was a villain who then became a like popular solo character on his own, like in the 90s, and which is kind of the arc that like the Punisher took, because the Punisher was a Spider-Man villain from the 70s. But like Morbius, there have been a couple like Morbius series published, but Morbius is basically like in like the early 70s. I think it was Roy Thomas who was like, hey, the Comics Code restrictions got lifted. Wouldn't it be fun if we put a vampire in a Spider-Man comic? And that's it. That's all it is. This is a character that was never meant to like, support his own stories, and now has a blockbuster movie about him.
To be fair, I mean, Marvel has done the same thing. It's just like their films have been a lot better, Like Marvel is really scraping the bottom of the barrel now with some of its heroes these days, right?
But all of those heroes have at least, I think, like had like lengthy ongoing series over
like comic book runs, you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the thing, like Guardians of the Galaxy was never popular, but those characters and that series had like decades of history and all that. Shang-Chi has had his own series for decades, and stuff like that. Like Morbius is just that vampire that Spider-Man fights every few years. That's basically it.
I think, first of all, Patrick, I don't know if you've heard this saying, but I am told legends are made, they're not born. So the idea that Morbius couldn't just become a legend because Sony christened it so, I think it's very possible, as this weekend has shown.
That's true.
Secondly, I think what's interesting is to track the whole history of the Marvel Sony Spider-Man situation, right? Because after Amazing Spider-Man 2, I think Amazing Spider-Man 2, if I recall correctly, was the worst performing Spider-Man film since the first Raimi film. if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it was only the 5th Spider-Man movie.
Yes.
And they had all been hits.
Yeah, they'd all been hit, but it was like it performed very badly. It was critically reviled, and Marvel basically came to Sony and said, "Look, guys, let's make a deal. It's like Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad. He's like, you guys suck at cooking meth, or you guys suck at selling meth." And Marvel basically went to Sony. He's like, "Look, guys, let's make a deal. You guys suck at making Spider-Man films, but you own Spider-Man rights. We are awesome at making Spider-Man films. Clearly we must be able to come to some kind of arrangement, right? There's got to be some way we can work this out." And so they were like, okay, Marvel would be responsible creatively for the Spider-Man films, and then Sony would be responsible for like distribution and also take some cut of the box office. And there was some contention around how much percent a few years back. Meanwhile, Sony does still get to play around with the other tools in the Spider-Man toolbox, right? Like Venom and Morbius.
And I will say, this is a thing that I'm always fascinated by. When Spider-Man: Homecoming, there's that like opening prologue with Michael Keaton and his crew cleaning up like Grand Central Station after the big battle of Avengers 1. And then there's this title card that says, is it like 9 years later or something like that? And that basically that fans have been annoyed about for years, because it kind of messes up the timeline of years of like with all the movies. And apparently that was a thing that was added in like the Sony post-production that Marvel didn't. I have heard that people at Marvel were mad about that because they didn't approve it. So there's still every so often this miscommunication between these two studios. And I think it's also Sony wants to, they don't want to feel like the little brother. They want to feel like they are actually making choices, and they're a part of this too. And they can actually make a good Spider-Man movie as well.
That's what they want to feel like. It remains to be seen whether that's the case. That said, they can make Spider-Man universe movies that make a lot of money. That's been shown to be 100% true, right? But yeah, they and here's the thing, Patrick. I think that relationship probably is awkward, but also together they just made the third best performing movie domestically at the box office of all time.
It's true,
and it's now they gotta figure out a way to work together, basically, ideally, because it's not in either of their interests to just take their Spider-Man toys and go home.
No.
Anyway, all this is the prelude to this movie, Morbius, which I think you've said is objectively hilarious that Jared Leto's in this movie. Go ahead.
There's so many things about it that are funny, because
Let me begin. Let me name one thing that's funny, okay? Right off the top. First of all, the movie opens with kind of this cold open of Jared Leto capturing vampire bats in, I think, Costa Rica, if I'm not mistaken. It then flashes back 25 years in time, where you meet Jared Leto's character and Matt Smith's character as kids. And Jared Harris is their doctor taking care of them. It then flashes forward again, but beyond where we were originally. And then you see Jared Harris again, and I swear to you, Patrick Willems, Jared Harris looks exactly the same in the 25 years later than he did in the 25 years before.
Yes.
Maybe he has a few more gray hairs, but otherwise his appearance is completely unchanged.
I mean, I feel like the simplest thing to do, I feel like what most movies might have done is just, in the past, he didn't have a beard, and now he has a beard.
Yeah, I mean, you could have done that. You could have, Jared Harris could have shaved his head, or put a bald cap on. You could have done a lot of things other than nothing. Yep. And right from the gate, that how much effort this movie is going to put into things, I think.
It is. There's so much about this that I'm really fascinated by, because I will say one thing about it is the director of the movie, Daniel Espinosa.
Yes.
Before this, he made the kind of sci-fi horror movie Life.
Yes.
Which I thought was a pretty good movie. It was very much just what if Alien meets Gravity?
Mhm.
And I thought it was pretty good. And pretty well directed, like for some like good, suspenseful stuff using a lot of visual effects. And based on that movie, he seemed like kind of like the right kind of guy to get for some kind of like comic book tentpole thing. It's like, okay, he can make a studio movie, he knows how to direct, he can work with big movie stars, he can work with visual effects, all those things.
Right.
And
also Safe House, solid action film in my opinion.
I never actually saw Safe House, but I've heard it's pretty solid.
Ryan Reynolds, yeah, solid movie.
Yeah. And this is a thing, and I'm really curious with this, where this is a thing where it's like, this is not an especially well-made movie, but there are, like,
there are cool ideas in the movie.
There are cool ideas in it, but it is also so clearly a movie that I'll just say had an interesting post-production time. And I really wonder, I'm not saying that I really do not think there is like a secret masterpiece version of Morbius out there. I don't think that was ever the case, but I am curious how much, if any, of Espinosa's work got mangled, because I'm thinking specifically of, I mean, obviously there's all the stuff in the trailers that are not in the movie. Especially a lot of like references to other Marvel stuff that are not in the movie.
Yeah.
But so, the scene after Morbius has become a vampire for the first time, and they're on this like freighter ship out in like off the coast of Long Island. And there's a sequence that there's like these
on the border of international waters is what I remember reading. Yeah,
exactly.
But yeah, what you're describing is probably the best sequence of the film, I think.
Well, I think it should be the best sequence in the film. So there's these mercenaries on board, and Morbius has become this vampire, and it is like the closest the movie goes to being like full on horror, where these mercenaries are kind of like being stalked and picked off by this vampire. And at no point does the editing in the sequence let any moment breathe to like build actual suspense. There is like, it goes so rapidly that like, there is not a single moment of silence or where things pause or like, and knowing that this director can direct suspense and horror pretty effectively. And then you have a sequence like this, which seems like made for him to like do the thing he's good at. And then it is hacked up and just turned into, it's like they took a horror scene and turned it into an action scene.
Yeah.
And so, and looking at that, I'm just like, this couldn't have been what he wanted to do, right? This like this is like not good, and it should be. This is like it's like a layup, and it couldn't make it.
A few thoughts, Patrick. Number one, Tom Rothman, who runs Sony, is like notorious for interfering editorially, creatively with directors and their films, right? So it's extremely likely. We don't know what happened, but it's extremely likely that's what happened, right? So that's to start with. Secondly, I haven't liked any of the Sony Spider-Verse movies other than Into the Spider-Verse. But what I can say is that mercifully they're all very short.
All under 2 hours.
When I went to go see this movie, it was like the listing said 1 hour 50 minutes, right? So I'm like, okay, 1 hour 50, that's pretty good. I go to the theater. I swear to you, I was out of that theater within 95 minutes. Like I don't know if the listing was wrong or if I just misperceived time, but I get home and my wife's like, what are you doing? Like, I thought you went to go see the movie. And I was like, I did because it's so short. I went to see the movie. I'm done. It is not at all surprising. Would not surprise me at all if Tom Rothman was there watching that sequence that was meticulously, beautifully, suspensefully edited by Daniel Espinosa. And he's like, you got to make it shorter. Just cut to the part where he kills the guy.
Yep.
What I like about the scene, though, is that it's like really dark. And I don't mean dark like in terms of illumination, because it is that as well. But like, it's just really upsetting. Like, it is rare to see the ostensible hero of the film depicted in such a kind of violent, negative light.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting. That's the one interesting decision this movie made is it shows Morbius as like, oh, this guy is like dangerous and can hurt people who might be not terrible. Now, the mercenaries were like not necessarily stand up. We just don't know anything about them. Like,
Right.
maybe they're evil, maybe they're fine, but like
they are presenting our sensible hero as like a monster here.
Yes, that's right.
And so here's the thing. This is it was actually during this sequence that I kind of like had my, I guess, the closest thing to a take on this movie that I have, which is, I think on paper, if you look at some of like the general story of this, if you like remove all the like, I guess, Marvel connective tissue and its desire to be a Marvel blockbuster, there are the elements of actually, I think, a pretty solid like sci-fi horror movie that maybe would cost like $20 million. But it really wants to be an action comic book blockbuster. And so it's like a thing that I like, an issue that I have with some Marvel movies. Like I had this issue with Shang-Chi, is that like, I think the movie is pretty good, but if it cost like half as much money, I think it could actually be much better. If it didn't feel the need to be like, well, we have to like have like this level of spectacle and visual effects and all of that stuff. I think that those kind of like detract from like kind of the better version of the movie. And the basic aspects of this movie of, you know, you have this brilliant doctor who has like suffered from this disease his whole life, who tries this experiment to like cure himself, accidentally turns himself into like kind of this monster. Again, we've seen this stuff before. It's very much like Jekyll and Hyde stuff. And then you have his like kind of, you know, kind of ostensibly like brother, then, you know, use the same thing and kind of like become like twisted by it, and actually become this like predator, like murdering people. Like that on paper, if that were just like a like much lower budget like horror movie, that ideally might be rated R, that could actually be pretty good. But this is a movie that is like, has these various like boxes it has to check of like, okay, we need our like CGI set pieces. We need to like build this, like it's too busy and too focused on being like, you know, a blockbuster movie. And it's like, it forgets to be like, it forgets about the better version of it. That's right there. It's not allowed to be.
It's interesting. I feel similarly about the film, but I feel like this is kind of what the Sony formula has become. If you look at Venom 1, Venom 2, Uncharted, and now Morbius, these are all movies that have the outline of a blockbuster film. Like,
right.
It has the bones of what this movie is supposed to be. And it's just like, yes, evil guy, good guy. It just like nods at these archetypes, but without doing the work that would be necessary to make these movies into something that's great, something that transcends genre. And at the same time, the movies are all really successful, Patrick. And here's another thing about the movies. They're all relatively low budget. You know, this movie came in at a $75 million budget. Like,
oh, that's it?
They're able to bring these movies in at a low cost and make a decent return on them. It's kind
very
of
funny
like,
that we think of $75 million as a lower budget.
Oh yeah, I mean it's basically mid-budget at this point. It's basically like applying the Jason Blum version of horror filmmaking, but to superhero films. So you're spending like 10x as much money as like a Get Out, but you're also making 10x as much. No, actually, that's not true. But
for example, obviously this was a different era, but imagine if Morbius had been made when Blade was made.
Well, Dan Murrell in his YouTube review, I think, put it really well, where he's like, this is what superhero films were like in the 90s. Like, Morbius, you could have transplanted it to 30 years ago, and it would have fit right in with the kind of movies we got back then, right?
It basically would. But, like, you know, I'm imagining if right after, like, Blade came out, if New Line had been like, hey, Morbius is right there. Let's do something like that. And if this were trying more to be a Blade and less like wanting to be like a Venom, Uh, I I think that would have resulted in a better movie because I think the very basic idea of this, like the premise of the movie is not actually bad and actually could have led to like a lot of potentially interesting things, but it was never going to be that because everything needs to be a universe building blockbuster.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the film, and then I kind of want to talk about the post-credit scene.
We've got to talk about
the post-credit scene, but I think the film itself, honestly, not that much. It's what I said. It's you have these archetypes: the good guy, the bad guy. Being taken in by the intoxicated by the danger and the power of this thing. Matt Smith is like pretty good overall as evil, like a cartoonishly evil villain.
Can we just say that it is such a bummer that Matt Smith, a really talented actor, has had truly the worst luck in his film career?
I don't remember. Was it you that said this, or was it someone else that said like Matt Smith had made a deal with the devil for every awesome TV role he gets, he must have an extremely terrible film role?
It was not me that said that, but it's true. Yeah. But you look at like the various like franchise movies he's signed on to, and it's always it's like okay, he's going to do a Terminator movie, but it's the worst Terminator movie that no one sees and no one likes. Oh, he signed on for a Marvel movie. Oh, it's really like a Sony Marvel movie, and it's also like the worst Sony Marvel movie. And even the fact that he even got cast in a Star Wars movie, but it was the worst Star Wars movie, and then he got cut out of the movie before he even filmed it.
Which Star Wars one was this?
He was going to be in Rise of Skywalker.
I see. Yeah. I mean, what is it that makes this film not great? Again, it's the fact that they don't spend any time building up any of these characters or the relationships. They're just going kind of from set piece to set piece to set piece. And I would say a lot of the action is fairly muddled as well. There are a handful of really cool moments. Like there's a moment that I think you see in the trailer where Morbius learns how to fly by like drafting off of the wind from a subway, New York City subway, I think. Like that was a cool moment. But overall, I think and then the movie just ends super abruptly. Like it reminded me of the Josh Trank Fantastic Four. Like I remember getting to the end of that movie and being like, oh, there must be a whole other act of this movie left. And then nope, it's just that's the end. That's the end. And it's just like, yep. And it kind of falls into the Suicide Squad school of filmmaking. Another very bad film that Jared Leto was in. That's like you created the problem that you then end up solving in the course of the movie.
Yep.
Right? Morbius creates this issue and then he solves it, and that's the end of the movie. Yeah.
I mean, I think my favorite section of the movie is once they it's like the period of basically where it kind of shifts focus a little bit over to Matt Smith after they have the scene where Matt Smith visits Morbius in the prison, and then it becomes clear that, oh, he's taken the serum himself and now he doesn't need a cane to walk anymore. And then you just have, watching Matt Smith be a villain is fun. He's good at it. He was good at it in Last Night in Soho. I liked watching Matt Smith like going to a bar to kind of like stalk victims. Matt Smith dances a bunch.
Yeah, the Matt Smith dance was awesome. Like that was great. Great moment in the movie.
Yeah. He's having fun and really putting in. He's a much more compelling character than Michael Morbius. So when it kind of shifts over to him, like kind of like reveling in his like new powers and like villainry, that was kind of fun. It's a thing that I think is. David, why is Jared Leto in this movie? Because here's the thing. So Jared Leto, who over the years has kind of a fascinating film career in that he wouldn't do movies that often. He's like, he would spend more time being, it's like he became known for being an actor. and not usually in lead roles. Just like, he had like My So-Called Life, and then was a supporting character in Fight Club, and supporting character in American Psycho, and then he became a rock star, and then he would do a movie like every 3 years or so, and then he wins an Oscar. And then I get that, kind of like in like the Nicolas Cage thing, like wins an Oscar and then is like, okay, I want to have some fun and be in like a big like action blockbuster.
Sure, very understandable.
Yeah, and I see like I really do not like his performance as the Joker. I think Suicide Squad is a dreadful movie, but I do get like why that would seem like a fun, appealing thing to do. But then he did a comic book movie, which is a thing that every A-list actor is required to do.
Yes. Contractually, yes.
Yeah. And then he did it. And then why would he then, after being the Joker, be like, okay, I need he's like 50. Why does he need another comic book franchise?
Let me tell the story from an alternate perspective, Patrick, okay? Yes, yeah, agreed with everything you said until like the Suicide Squad part of Jared Leto's career, but Suicide Squad was, my guess, is a painful and terrible experience for everyone involved, right?
Does that include him?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that he was probably what he thought would end up in the film probably didn't end up in the film. Then Warner Brothers went on to make the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, and I think that was probably painful for him as well.
Yeah.
My understanding was there's quite a bit of consternation over the fact that like that movie is going to be coming out like shortly after Birds of Prey and The Suicide Squad. It's like, and he probably had a not great experience with the DCEU, right? And Sony comes knocking. They're like, "Hey, we got this Morbius guy who wants to play this kind of brainy, buff dude." And somehow it crosses his desk, and it's like, "Hey, you can headline the film." You can be the guy who is the titular character of Morbius. You can be the guy, and if it does well, we'll make a franchise of it. He probably got shafted by Warner Brothers. Like, looking back on it, and I'm not saying he shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
I did not like his performance as Joker, but he probably got shafted. And then they're like, this opportunity comes knocking, and it's like, you know what? It is time for Jared Leto's time in the sun as a comic book character. So. That's an alternate version you could tell, right?
David, you make a compelling case.
Yeah.
I do just... Yeah, okay. I believe... You've convinced me. I think that is the case. I still think it's funny that this is the one he chose.
Mm-hmm. But what else is he getting offered? You know what I mean? Like, do you think he's not getting offered Blade or anything like that? You know what I mean? Like...
I mean... I think
you can be in the Eternals, Jared Leto. He's like, well, I already did one of those Squad movies.
I think he gets offered. I mean, he's pretty choosy. He doesn't. Mm-hmm. He still doesn't do a ton of movies. It's like he'll be like a minor but important character in Blade Runner. Mm-hmm. He's and from what I have heard from people who know him, he might even be. Like he's not planning on like acting in movies until he's like 80 years old. Like he doesn't need to be in a movie every single year the way most actors do. And so yeah, this still to me is like it's a funny choice, and it's also everything about him in this is weird, and it's all because a thing about Jared Leto is. And how do I? If you look at the roles he's had over the course of his filmography, he doesn't tend to play a lot of likable, sympathetic protagonists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's like I think he kind of does understand something about himself, and that like he kind of knows what he's suited for.
Yeah.
And this is, again, when Matt Smith kind of like steals the focus of the movie, I think it becomes a lot more interesting because, Jared Leto seems like, I don't know, he should be the villain of this movie. He just has the sort of like the weird, cold, like creepiness to him that doesn't really click with being this like really sympathetic protagonist who's like really suffered for a long time and who's like a romantic lead.
Yeah.
Like that all seems like a weird fit to me.
It's fair enough. First of all, Patrick, I greatly enjoy all of our chats.
As do I.
But I love how every single time we talk about a movie like this, it devolves into trying to psychoanalyze the people who made the movie, which I don't think is a bad thing. I'm just pointing that out. To bring it back to the movie a little bit, I am fascinated by the things that the movie chose to explain and not explain. Okay? So here's the thing that the movie chose not explain. How child version of Morbius fixed this machine in the thing. The whole sequence of when they were children was unintentionally hilarious because like his friend just like keels over, just like straight up like he's just like and then I'm not trying to make fun of like childhood illness, but the way it's filmed is like you don't even realize what's happening until you see the kid's reaction to it. Basically,
30 seconds after they meet, the kid just keels over and is like about to die.
Oh, and then it's like and then he like fixes it using a pen.
Which is also a thing. The thing with fixing the pen, I'm like, so is he like a mechanic, like an engineering genius?
Right.
Because that's machinery that he fixed.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like everything is poorly explained. Like where his area of expertise is, what the nature of their diseases are. Like I don't think it's super clear like what they're suffering from or what the prognosis is. And then the movie like does explain other things like how Morbius got his lab. Like we had to have a whole sequence of like how he's like, I'm coming in and I'm taking over this lab because I need all your, not because of the counterfeit money thing, but because I need all the shit that's here. I need all the bips and bops, the odds and ends here. And it's like, okay, I don't know why you felt the need to go into a subplot about this, but not about all this other extremely important stuff.
Also, an important thing to mention, David, there is, so this movie takes place in New York City.
Yes.
And we do have several abandoned shopping malls just like that in New York.
I hang out in them all the time. I think you're actually doing this video from one, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's an escalator right over there. It's just a cool place to hang out.
Yeah, but no, they needed to have this whole subplot with like speaking characters explaining like why they have this lab that he then needs to go to. Don't know why it couldn't just be him foraging for shit at night. Like it's like, okay, whatever. And by the way, Patrick, I do want to say there's a very fine line between homage and ripping off. Mm-hmm. And this movie, I would argue, just straight up rips off from a couple films.
Which ones?
Two very prominently. Batman Begins. There's this moment when Morbius enters the Bat Chamber and the score that is extremely similar to the score for Batman Begins plays. And it plays at a very similar, like the visual is the same of like, Christian Bale standing up in the Batcave, Morbius entering the Bat Chamber. It's like, I'm just like, this is not cool, man.
Yeah,
this is not cool.
I hoped that we would talk about this because there's this musical motif in the scores to the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yes.
Of almost like these rising notes. I'm like, I can't sing it right now, but like it's kind of like
I can sing it. I can sing. It's like da da. It's like a minor third. It goes like da da, and it's like these like horns that
and it really
swell.
Like holds like this like big like da.
Yes.
And like it hits that in Batman Begins when he's like down like exploring the Batcave.
Yes.
And when it cuts,
it's a beautiful moment. It's like a transcendently amazing moment in Batman Begins.
It's great. And when it cuts to the wide shot as you see Bruce Wayne surrounded by bats, and not only does it visually quote that moment, the music and it plays this music a couple other times in the movie. It basically quotes that piece of the score.
Yes.
And it's pretty wild.
Yes, it's brazen.
But and you know what this has that Batman Begins does not have? During the final fight scene between Morbius and Matt Smith's character Milo, who, one thing I just want to mention, by the way, Matt Smith's character is not actually named Milo. His name is Lucian. Milo is kind of like a dickish nickname that Morbius gives to him as a kid, because like the previous kid who'd like slept in his bed at the hospital or whatever was named Milo, and he just calls him Milo for the rest of his life. And so I feel like the groundwork is laid for Matt Smith to have this resentment toward him for over all these decades, because he just keeps calling him this annoying nickname that's not his actual name. But also, Jared Harris also calls him Milo, and he's like the nice, caring doctor. Weird. Yeah. Anyway, but during the final fight
also,
scene...
it's weird that like Milo is the first one we meet during the flashback, as though he's going to be the main character of the movie. Anyway.
And he also has the crutch on each arm, and so I thought that was Morbius at first, because Morbius... weird.
It's like just basic... This is basic filmmaking 101 stuff. Anyway, continue.
Exactly. But during the final fight scene, when basically Morbius wins by remembering that he has kind of this psychic link with bats, also kind of like Batman Begins summons a giant swarm of bats. But one thing that he does that Batman never does, and David, I've read a lot of Batman comics in my life.
Yep.
To my knowledge, Batman has never done this. He does like a bat Hadouken, and basically like shoots his like hands forward with like this stream of bats that slams Matt Smith against a wall, and that's when he's able to finally stab him. It's again,
I think you're making the movie out to be way more interesting than it is.
It is. The thing about this is it's also
everything you said is accurate.
Yeah, it's a little visually incoherent, and so it's not. It doesn't land because there's just like swarms of bats everywhere. So I'm like, is that what's happening? But I am pretty sure that he does a bat Hadouken, which I've never seen in a movie before.
It's true. It's true. That is something innovative that Morbius brought to the equation. The other scene that was kind of a ripoff a little bit, could be a ripoff, could be an homage, is the scene when you discover Matt Smith is taking the serum. And I think it's clearly a reference to The Usual Suspects.
Yes.
Less of a ripoff because at least they're not imitating like the score and the shots from it.
It would be pretty funny if Morbius suddenly had a coffee cup that he dropped.
Yeah. Yes, it's true. But they did cut to his feet, Matt Smith's feet, like multiple times. So I'm like, okay, you don't need to lay it on so thick there. But yeah, and going to this part about the bats, I think that I don't feel like, again, it's the bones of a screenplay. It's like, okay, at the end, Morbius has this leg up on Matt Smith that he has communed with the bats in a way that Matt Smith has not. And I don't think the movie did a very good job of laying that out. You know, like no. Ideally, you have like scenes with like Matt Smith and Jared Leto talking, and Jared Leto's like, the bats are so beautiful. Matt Smith's like, they're filthy rodents. I hate them. And you know, like you have some build up to this big climactic moment that like that's why Morbius wins, is because he's more compassionate to the bats. But I don't think we get any of that.
Yeah, I mean, really, if you look at the climax, I feel like is the ultimate theme of the movie that you have to like empathize with animals to like are you right? you need to understand the source.
You need to have empathy. Period. By the way, here's another thing that the movie gives us. By the way, which, you know, by coincidence, I was trying to think through like what were the storytelling decisions that went behind this, because Jared Leto's character in the film also invented artificial blood, which like would be a world-changing technology if it actually existed.
Well,
right?
I mean, they try to give him a Nobel Prize.
Yes.
But he rejects it.
For reasons? Is it clear why?
No, he goes to the ceremony. He's there in white tie attire. And then apparently it's also weird because this makes him look like he's supposed to be some kind of like, I don't know, like
hipster scientist. Like
I was gonna say like Kevin Bacon and Hollow Man, like some kind of asshole rock star scientist who's like, look, I don't care about the awards. I just like I just do my thing.
It used to be about the science, man.
Right. But it's not really clear, because then it just cuts to him back in his lab talking to Eiza Gonzalez, and she's like, "So you didn't accept the award?" He's like, "No, I don't want. I
don't do this for awards." You know?
Then why did you go? Why
because then we wouldn't have that scene. And what's so weird, Patrick, is I don't believe they show him rejecting it, do they?
No, they show
So-
him at the ceremony as
Yeah.
they're like, reading out his introduction right before they give him the award. And then it cuts to him back in New York and they just are talking about how he turned it down. And I don't know, in terms of like, for like reintroducing him, like after this like prologue flashback, it does seem like a weird choice. Like they could have just, I think it would have been more effective, more efficient in terms of storytelling, and also easier for the production if they just mentioned in like one line of dialogue that he had turned down the Nobel.
They made the newspaper article, just like throw down newspaper article, close up on newspaper. Hey, rock star scientist, you turned down the Nobel Prize last night. It's bizarre. Like, I can't imagine. Like, it takes money to get that many extras, to get the set, to shoot the thing. There had to be some other purpose for that scene of them at the Nobel Prize, right? Like,
yeah.
But I bet they shot him giving some kind of speech, and Tom Rothman, head of Sony, was like, cut it. Like, it's not, just have him talking about it later. Just cut it, right? And Daniel Espinosa's like, well, we spent like 3 days shooting this scene at the Nobel Prize ceremony. Like, let's at least put like 3 seconds from it in the film.
Yeah, Morbius like goes on to like I need to actually like write down this list, but down this increasingly long list of movies where I am more interested in reading an oral history of the production of the movie than I am in ever watching the movie again.
Mission Impossible 7 and 8 might be on that list.
Although
we want to see those movies.
Those movies are going to rule.
Yes.
But also I want to any viewers or our listeners, this is a thing that David and I just text about, because the ongoing saga of like what seemed like maybe some of the most difficult movie shoots of all time. It is fascinating.
Yes. This is like the what is it? Terry Gilliam's Don Quixote movie, basically, of Mission Impossible movies.
Exactly.
So anyway, so as I was saying, by coincidence, he has invented artificial blood, and I'm like, like, what is the storytelling purpose of him inventing artificial blood? It is so that, first of all, it's the idea that he can like subsist on artificial blood for a while, but that he really needs the good stuff to actually thrive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what this movie gives us not only is a Bat Hadouken, Patrick, but it gives us Jared Leto, Academy Award-winning actor Jared Leto, ravenously squeezing artificial blood into his mouth like it's Go-Gurt on multiple occasions.
And it does look like Go-Gurt. It really does. It has a kind of like milky look to it.
It's like a blue milk kind of thing. It's like,
it looks like blue milk from Star Wars. Yes. And I'm like, what is the purpose? Like,
so they wanted like some substance for him to consume that isn't blood, that is good enough, and then like later he wants blood, right? And it's like, but why did he have to invent it? Was there a reason?
Well, this another thing that I'm like, there must have been more to this that got cut out, because there's a subplot in the movie where Tyrese Gibson and Al Madrigal are these two detectives who are investigating this case of like the dead bodies on like the oil tanker off the coast of Long Island. And I will say, one thing I kind of appreciate is that they figure out that it's Morbius really quickly instead of dragging that out interminably.
That was nice.
But they have this thing where these detectives are like on the case and figuring this out and suspecting Michael Morbius, because again, he look at him, he looks like a weirdo. And then there's when they meet, Tyrese says, "Hey, that artificial blood you invented saved my arm in like
Afghanistan." I think
Afghanistan. And then there's like one shot. Also, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, you saw more of this in the trailer that got cut out, but I think there's one shot in the movie, like late, like in the third act, where you see Tyrese with this like metal thing on part of his arm that presumably is from like when almost like a bionic arm type thing. But yeah, but there, right there is that connection of like, okay, here's this thing that he did, he has this like history, this link to this supporting character. His invention helped him, but then those characters have no relationship. It's not. It's like the detectives, their story goes nowhere. There's
No,
never a point where they show up in the climax and then like,
well,
you know,
they do show up at the end. I think they're at the very last shot. I think like they open the manhole or whatever, or the grate or whatever, and the bats fly up. So
there's that.
there. Yeah.
But like, you'd expect they would like show up during the climactic scene and maybe like decide to like help Morbius, even though they've been chasing him all this time. But no, other than arresting him one time, they do not factor into the story of the movie at all. They have no arcs. They don't do anything other than show up at crime scenes.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. I think we've managed to identify some of the reasons why this movie is really weird and silly. Subplots go nowhere. It's moving from set piece to set piece. There's no real development between any of the characters, and it's not bad in a particularly interesting way, unfortunately.
No,
it's just kind of bad.
It's not a terrible movie. It's just a kind of normally bad movie.
Yes, normally bad, I would argue, yeah.
One thing I do want to mention, because I feel like a lot of the budget went into this, is the way the action scenes are done is in a way where this is like maybe one of the most like video gamey looking action movies I've ever seen. Because the action scenes, because these characters, you know, they're like these superpowered vampires who also travel with these kind of like colored smoke trails coming behind them.
It's like what's his name, Alan Cummings' character from X-Men 2, you know, like
Nightcrawler.
Nightcrawler, right? Like, yeah, it's very
like
similar
that,
in that aesthetic,
kind of a little bit like the way like the Death Eaters in the Harry Potter movies kind of like fly around. It's this. So there's all this just like CGI nonsense like coming off of them as they're like moving around, and but the way the action scenes go is like they'll be moving super fast, and then the camera will like fly through the air super fast, and then do like this speed ramping thing where then it'll go into super slow mo as the camera will kind of like move around them for like as they're like doing like one hit, and the way it feels like is did you ever play the God of War games?
Yes, love them.
You know that thing in the God of War games when you're like fighting a person and then it'll be like, oh, you'll do like a combo thing. It'll be like hit square to do this move, and it'll like
quick time events.
Yes. Yeah, and it'll like almost freeze, and then you'll hit the button, and then it'll move fast, and then it'll like freeze again for like the next hit you're gonna do. It basically does that, which is a thing where it looks like it's directly inspired by like QuickTime events in video games, which is a thing where when you are controlling it in a video game and are like hitting the button to make that happen. So like when it freezes, you actually get like tense because you're like, oh man, now I have to do a thing now. And so I've got to hit the button. But when you're watching it play out on film, and again, maybe other people think differently, I think it's not very engaging. I feel like I'm watching someone else play a video game because the camera moves with, you know, clearly no physical connection to anything in a way cameras can't possibly move. And I'm basically just watching CGI things fly around in a way that like, where it's like, there isn't really a sense of choreography, and there also isn't any like suspense to it. So it's like it's designed to look cool above all else.
I mean, first of all, QuickTime events are generally, I think, have a poor reputation in the video game industry, is my sense. Like people don't like them very much because they're not super enjoyable, because you're playing in this whole other mode of play, and then all of a sudden you need to do this other different thing, and it's kind of the illusion that you're in control of the situation when you're not really.
Right.
Having said that, I think that QuickTime events are, in fact, more enjoyable than what we see in this film, per your description. And one reason for that is I think just what is around the QuickTime event in the movies is like completely incomprehensible. Like,
yes.
It's reminded me actually of less of QuickTime events and more of like speed ramping in like Zack Snyder movies, like 300.
Yeah, but the more incomprehensible than that.
What'd you say?
But more incomprehensible.
Exactly.
Because
like in
Zack Snyder's
300, you're watching people like do like incredibly badass stuff, and then it slows down so you can appreciate the badass thing they're doing. In Morbius, you have no idea what's going on. It's moving so fast and so dark that it's like barely comprehensible. Then it slows down for like 2 seconds. And the 2 seconds just allows you to see what is happening, but typically it's not like what is happening is particularly cool. It's just, but we're playing this in fast motion, and now here's a glimpse of it, and now we're back to fast motion again. It's not like, oh wow, that was the most badass moment of that thing. It was, the whole thing is just really hard to understand visually, in my opinion.
It is, and it's also not a thing like, it doesn't serve the function of, for instance, like showing you what's happening from like someone's perspective, because like when it's all happening really fast, there is a way where and it's like kind of incomprehensible. You could do that from the perspective of like a bystander who's like, who can like barely comprehend these like super fast vampires flying around, except the camera is also flying around. So it's kind of showing it to you sort of from like how like Morbius is seeing it, but it's so busy and frantic that you can't really tell what's going on. And then when it goes into super slow motion, the camera's also still flying around, but I'm like, it's not like Morbius is seeing this fight in slow motion.
There's no logic to how it's shot, basically, right? Like in a Michael Bay film, even sometimes when it like slows down, that's often from like the perspective of like the character, right? You're often like, you're close up on the character's face. You're experiencing it in their version of time, basically, right?
If anything, this is like doing an entire action scene the way that they do the spider sense in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies.
Yep.
Except it doesn't make sense because in those movies, it's from Spider-Man's perspective. And this isn't from anyone's perspective. This just feels very much like someone had a in quotes cool visual idea for the action scenes that seems directly pulled from video games, and I don't think it's very entertaining to watch on film.
Well, Patrick, when we began this conversation, you said we're going to end up talking for 3 hours about Morbius, aren't we? And I said it's not impossible. But we've almost gone an hour. I am going to get us to this post-credit scenes because we have to talk about this, and then we should wrap up, because I think if we go any longer, this conversation will be longer than Morbius itself. Which is a goal I don't want to hit. Honestly.
No, we don't. We can't let that happen.
We cannot, under no circumstances can we allow this to occur. So there are 2 post-credit scenes in this movie. And I need to describe what happens in them, and then we need to talk about the implications, okay? So in the first post-credit scenes, we see the universe of New York City like split apart in a similar visual style to what we saw at the ending of Spider-Man No Way Home, right? So spoilers for that movie, like the multiverse started like bleeding in with itself, and like people from other multiverses who knew Peter Parker started like entering the universe that they were in. That's what happened at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home. In this movie, Michael Keaton, who plays Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming, appears in jail, right? And then it's like, he's like, well, I hope they have better food here than the last place, or something like that. And then
also, can I just say, he's like touching his body as if his mind was put into a new body, which was weird.
And then the idea is like he's let go because I guess he's like, just to the people in this universe, I think the implication is he's just some random guy that appeared in jail.
Yes.
Right? Like, so the people in this universe don't know about Vulture. This is not the primary MCU storyline, is what I think we've been led to believe. Right? So my mind is already reeling, because that already makes everything what I just said makes no sense already. Like that doesn't track with what we know about what happened in Spider-Man No Way Home. Okay. So then later post-credit sequence, Morbius is driving some Ferrari or whatever through some field in the middle of nowhere, and then he pulls over and gets out of the car, and then Michael Keaton shows up in full Vulture regalia. I don't actually think it's Michael Keaton. I think it's some body double.
You do not see his face. There is absolutely no way Michael Keaton was on set for that. Michael Keaton did not
go out to the desert to film that scene. In fact, probably everything that Michael Keaton filmed was done in one day with green screen.
But don't forget about the Michael Keaton stuff that's in the trailer, but not in the movie.
That was a second day of filming, probably.
Yeah.
But okay, and then Michael Keaton's like, so I hear people talking about you, Dr. Morbius. You're like a pretty cool guy. Let's say we team up. That's basically that's basically. I don't know if I've captured it. What do you think? What do you think?
No, I think you did a pretty good job.
Oh, here's the quote. Here's the quote. He says, "I don't know why I'm here. I think it has something to do with Spider-Man, but I feel like guys like you and me should team up." So that's kind of what he says. Now, let's walk through this real quick. First of all, it doesn't make sense that this guy Adrian Toomes, right, would appear in the primary MCU universe because he was already there. Right? Because that's how we know who Vulture is. He's from that universe. So maybe in the No Way Home situation with the universe splitting, he got sent to another universe that wasn't the primary universe, right? Like I guess that's
okay. David, I have been thinking about this nonstop since yesterday.
Yes, please,
because
please.
I'm in general just kind of tired of post-credit scenes. I rarely find them very interesting anymore. They used to be very exciting. Initially they were fun little jokes, and then they became actually exciting when you had like the end of Iron Man. And now they're just these obligations that set up sequels that are usually annoying.
Yes.
These might be the dumbest post-credit scenes I've ever seen.
This is when post-credit scenes have jumped the shark now. Like this is the turning point this is the slap of post-credit scenes, basically. You will divide it between before and after this post-credit scene.
So here's the thing. If you look at in Spider-Man No Way Home, the basic conceit of like the universes break, like the multiverse and things crossing over, is they mess up a spell and people who knew a Peter Parker travel over, and specifically they travel over to the MCU, like that universe. And
let's call it like MCU Prime or Universe Prime.
Great, and it's already a little bit sweaty there because it's like, where is Mary Jane and Aunt May and all of these other people? But like, whatever. That's their rule. But don't forget, Eddie Brock, aka Venom, despite not knowing Peter Parker, also at the end in the post-credit scene of Venom 2, he travels over to the MCU, and then the post-credit scene of No Way Home, what happens is, he's there. He's been sitting at a bar the whole time, and then when Doctor Strange undoes the spell, and then he goes back.
Yes,
and yet somehow Michael Keaton is the only guy who travels to a different universe. Oh, he leaves MCU Prime and goes to a different universe, and then he stays there when everyone else was returned to where they were supposed to be. And so that alone, like, it does not follow the rules they established. It is nonsense. Here's the other thing.
Oh, well, the other thing is, sorry, go ahead. You take it. Well, I think I know what you're going to say, but you go ahead.
There's a couple things. Well, also, his like Vulture technology, that was made from leftover pieces of the Chitauri
in the wake of the Avengers attack on New York City.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does he have that?
Doesn't
make any sense. But also, the post-credit scene of Spider-Man Homecoming, Adrian Toomes is in prison, and he's talking to Mac Gargan, who in the comics becomes the Scorpion, and he's like, hey, we should team up. There's like more of us here. And now this is a different movie where he's in a different universe, and the post-credit scene, Michael Keaton goes, hey, we should team up. So I'm just wondering, are we going to have, for the next decade, a string of post-credit scenes where Michael Keaton says to people, let's team up, and then they are never followed through on?
Michael Keaton, meanwhile, is the real winner from this is Michael Keaton, who collects like a $150,000 check every single time he like makes one of these things, probably.
Yeah. Also, it's weird because the Vulture is a villain who would want to team up with other villains, presumably. Morbius, he's a vampire, but he's the hero of this movie. Why is he going to team up with this like thief?
It makes absolutely no sense. Again, it is the thing that I have been talking about this whole conversation. It is the outline, the sketch, the outline of an MCU style team up. It's like, hey, like right down in script, Michael Keaton and Jared Leto team up. And that's literally like, okay, we need to figure out a way to make that happen. But rather than figure out a organic story-driven way to make it happen, it's just he shows up at the end and says we should team up. Like that's literally what it is.
I thought of this right now. I just thought of a way better solution that would have made more sense and I think been more appealing to people.
Okay.
What if there's no Michael Keaton in this movie? What if your post-credit scene is you've got your like cracks in the sky or whatever, and then after Doctor Strange undoes the spell or whatever, then when Eddie Brock gets sucked out of MCU Prime, he ends up in New York, and suddenly he's there with Morbius. Because they already established, with like a reference to San Francisco, they're already in the same world anyway.
Why? I don't know why they didn't do that. Was it easier to get Michael Keaton to appear in your film than Tom Hardy?
But then you've also...
Tom Hardy, who, by the way, is clearly really into this, because he's made 2 of these movies.
But then you've also got to wonder, because there's that part in the trailer where Michael Keaton, I think, is standing near a police car and says something about like, hey, Doc, to Morbius. What was the original intent before they clearly like shot that second extra scene without Michael Keaton on set? And then there's also the thing that was in the trailer where Jared Leto, when he's into like prison garb, he like walks past this like poster of Spider-Man that someone has graffitied the word murderer on. And so there was a point where there was a Spider-Man in this world, but then clearly they cut that out. Again, this is why I want the oral history of it.
It's possible that that's true, Patrick, or it's possible that they just filmed a bunch of shit that they knew they're gonna put in the trailer, right? And honestly, I don't know which one is the fact. So anyway, I think the overwhelming sense you're getting from this conversation, if you're watching this still, is one of complete befuddlement. Like there's just so many things that it's like, why did they do it that way? You know? And that's what makes it something that I wanted to talk with you about, because it's like there's just so many baffling decisions. And if it was bad in a way that it all cohesively made sense, it'd be like, okay, whatever. Not really worth talking about.
Right.
But there's so many things that's like, what was the plan here? You know, what was the plan?
And this is exactly why I think I love imagining how annoyed Kevin Feige must be that now probably with him having no say in the matter, Michael Keaton is stuck in some other universe.
Yes.
It's so
okay.
funny.
It wouldn't be the first time that Marvel has like retconned a post-credit sequence. You know, like they've done that in the past. So
exactly.
So I don't feel too bad for him. But yes, there is a sense you get from like Kevin Feige. You know, like the fact that like Spider-Man is only coinciding with these Sony films either in the trailers or in post-credit sequences. That makes it feel like there's probably not that much love lost between these parties. But we shall see, Patrick. We shall see. All right. Anything else about Morbius, or shall we wrap it up there?
Yeah, I still cannot believe that they cut the line, just kidding, it's Dr. Michael Morbius at your service, out of the movie. Because that line in the trailer where he says he's Venom and then says, just kidding, it's Dr. Michael Morbius at your service, is so weird and so funny. And then I was waiting for
the movie is like fairly humorless, I would say.
Oh, it is. And then they cut that line out. So the scene that it happens in, he just tells someone that he's Venom, and then the scene is over. It is a baffling decision, and I can't believe they did it.
In a movie filled with them. Well, anyway, you can check out Patrick's work at youtube.com/Patrick H. Willems. For a lot of smart commentary and great video essays. Patrick H. Willems, thanks so much for chatting with me today, man. Really appreciate it.
David, it was such a pleasure.
It was something.
Morbius. It's a movie.
All right, that's going to do it for us today, folks. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to hit like, subscribe, hit that bell icon to get future videos. I want to thank all my patrons at patreon.com/DaveChen. They are the ones who are supporting me and making this channel and all of the other work I do on the Filmcast and on Culturally Relevant possible. Thank you so much for your support, and sign up at patreon.com/DaveChen to get exclusive bonus audio episodes. All right, until next time, see you later.